On this episode of CyberWatch, cyber criminals can't stop attacking healthcare organizations. LinkedIn might be riskier than you know. A Hypervisor vulnerability has an active exploit in the wild. And Texas says Meta's privacy failures are worth a cool $1.4 billion. All this and a discussion of how healthcare cybercrime puts patients in danger today in CyberWatch. Hello, and welcome to the CyberWatch podcast for the week of August 4th, 2024. This is your weekly roundup of the news and analysis published on CyberWatch. I'm your host, Curtis Franklin. Let's get to the news. On July 30th, Meta Platforms agreed to a record-breaking $1.4 billion settlement with the state of Texas to resolve a lawsuit accusing the Facebook parent company of unlawfully using facial recognition technology to collect biometric data from millions of Texans without their consent. The lawsuit, filed in 2022 by Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton, alleged that Meta's Tag Suggestions feature violated the state's 2009 biometric privacy law when it collected biometric information without users' consent. Introduced in 2011, the Tag Suggestions feature was turned on by default and ran facial recognition on users' photos, capturing biometric data without their consent. Biometric data such as fingerprints, facial recognition, and iris scans are unique to each individual and can provide a wealth of information both to the organization collecting the data and to cybercriminals who might exploit vulnerabilities in the company's data security. In response to the incident, Meta took steps to discontinue the Tag Suggestions feature and negotiated with Texas to reach the settlement while denying any wrongdoing. If you use VMware's ESXi bare metal hypervisor, pay attention. Microsoft Threat Intelligence has issued a threat intelligence advisory regarding a vulnerability impacting the hypervisor. A patch has been released for the vulnerability, which is categorized as CVE 2024-3708S. It has a CVSS of 3.1 and 6.8. Now, these aren't high CVSS scores, but it is being actively used by threat actors such as Storm 0506, Storm 1175, Octo Tempest, and Manatee Tempest in ransomware campaigns. This vulnerability by itself is considered medium severity, but it can be very impactful when used in tandem with other tactics. It can allow authentication bypass and administrator privileges over critical business infrastructure. Evidence indicates the vulnerability has been exploited by multiple threat actor groups. Fixed versions have been released for ESXi version 8.0 and VMware Cloud Foundation 5.x. Moving to update 3 for ESXi and 5.2 for VMware Cloud Foundation will remediate this vulnerability. The takeaway is simple: patch now. If you can't patch, go to this article in CyberWatch for other options in remediation. Now, if you're like most business folks, you see LinkedIn as the serious social media site. You're joined in that view by some 875 million fellow users. Unfortunately, LinkedIn has a hidden dark side. It has become a prime destination for threat actors seeking to gather intelligence about potential victims. On the one hand, this is hardly surprising. LinkedIn is where business professionals share details on their projects, accomplishments, and job changes. On the other hand, LinkedIn has been seen as a relatively safe space for business and security challenges that can strike at the heart of that. There are many different facts that can be gathered from LinkedIn posts, from corporate organizations to planned projects to personnel needs and job openings. Now, as an example, the North Korean nation-state threat actor known as the Lazarus Group used LinkedIn to search for cryptocurrency industry jobs and initiate contact with prospective victims through its messaging system. Another campaign, the Ducktail exploit, was used to gain control over Facebook business accounts for malicious advertising. There are a host of open source tools intended to make life easier for marketers, researchers, and HR professionals. Unfortunately, they also make life much easier for threat actors. These open source intelligence tools are, like many network discovery and management tools, the very definition of two-edged swords. LinkedIn is aware of the problem and does offer tools to help users protect themselves. Every LinkedIn user is encouraged to read and use Safety on Social Media, a page on LinkedIn, to develop best practices for their social media use. Finally, in the news, a ransomware attack on a blood bank in Florida illustrates two growing trends in cybersecurity. The first is attacks on healthcare organizations. The second is attacks on supply chains for business. In this case, the attack on a single supplier of blood products has had an impact on more than 300 hospitals across the Southeast. Federal officials are warning that ransomware attacks against this sector will continue to escalate and are deliberately targeting systemic weak points like that represented by OneBlood, an Orlando-based nonprofit which supplies healthcare providers in Florida, Georgia, Alabama, North and South Carolina. According to a OneBlood spokesperson, a July 29th attack hit the blood supplier and forced the organization to use manual, paper-based processes for dealing with both gathering and distributing blood components. While the organization's IT systems continue to come back online, hospital officials estimate that OneBlood's IT capacity is roughly 40% of normal as of this recording. It's important to note that OneBlood's difficulty is not because of any blood shortage. It's a problem with distributing the blood due to the IT system compromise. Now, one of the factors that makes healthcare such an attractive target for cybercriminals is the chronic shortage of cybersecurity professionals in the space, combined with a long-term lack of funding for cybersecurity improvements in many healthcare organizations. Both of these have been targeted by the industry for improvement, but executives are racing against cybercriminals who have targeted the industry for criminal profit. Well, that's the news for this week. Next, we have a conversation with Kathy Boyle. We'll be talking about cyber criminals attacking healthcare organizations and the devastating impact those attacks can have on patients. Kathy, welcome to the CyberWatch podcast.
Thank you, Kurt. It's great to be here.
Kathy, let's start. Can you tell us what you do with Access Point Consulting?
Sure. So I am the Senior Compliance Director of the Compliance Services at Access Point.
Very good. Now, what does that mean? Those are great words, but what does that mean in terms of what you do for your clients?
So we have a whole team dedicated to compliance and to going into different businesses, different types of businesses, and ensuring they are compliant with whatever regulatory framework they follow.
Very good. Sounds like an important kind of thing. So how does one reach this position? What was your road to get here?
Well, my road was a little unusual. I'm a nurse. I spent my first 25 years of nursing in a hospital. I was bedside critical care for a number of years. And then I went into management. And then my management was a little diversified. I found a love for process improvement. So I would go to different areas of the hospital or look at different processes and see how we could fix those and then tie them up neatly and implement those. From there, I went into the vice president role of mental health and long-term rehab. And that's kind of where my love for compliance really grew. It's very highly regulated area of the hospital. And then I was given an opportunity to jump from healthcare to IT, which was a little unnerving, but All good. And it's just been awesome since there. I've been loving to learn the role of IT in different areas. And then, of course, can tie in my healthcare background and in hospitals in the HIPAA arena.
Very good. Well, we're very pleased to have you with us today. And I want to start, you wrote a report that was published about a week ago on the impact of cyber attacks on not just healthcare organizations, but on their patients. And I want to start, it seems like we've had a lot of news about attacks on healthcare organizations. Is the number of attacks increasing, or does it just seem that way right now?
No, it's definitely on the rise. I think the attackers are ruthless, and they are seeing healthcare organizations as a very vulnerable spot to engage with.
Now, you mentioned healthcare organizations being vulnerable. Why is that? Is there some characteristic of the industry that makes them particularly vulnerable to cyber attack?
I think just unpreparedness. Regulations really aren't tight. And I think that there just needs to be a focus on it. I don't think it's been focused on. I think the focus has been on implementing EHRs, electronic health records, and the focus has not been strong on security in the past.
I, like many people, am surprised to hear you say that, because I think many of us see things like, HIPAA and the other regulations that healthcare organizations live under and say, well, they must be a heavily regulated industry when it comes to all facets of their data handling. Is that not true?
Well, I think that's true in a way. I think HIPAA's focus is on obtaining patient data. My concern or my focus on the article was patient safety. Do people realize that if there is a cyber attack, what it can do to patient safety? And I think that that's where really the CIO of the hospitals and the CNO, the nursing leaders, need to come together and try to figure it out and enlighten one another.
Now, just to be really clear, when you talk about patient safety, you're not talking about keeping their records confidential. You're talking about genuine safety, life and death kind of issues, right?
Correct. So like the nursing leaders, their patient safety focus would be on, falls, medication errors, pressure ulcers, that type of safety, the care of the patient. But in a cyber attack, it can result to death. I mean, if your patient is coming in with a stroke and your system goes down, you only have 3 hours to administer that clotbuster TPA to a patient. So by the time the patient realizes they're having a stroke and calls the ambulance and then gets to a hospital, it could be catastrophic if that hospital's on divert because of a cyber attack, or if the hospital can't get the medication because the system is shut down and such that they can't get the medication out of the system.
That is fascinating. I know that several years ago, I covered a story about an incident in Germany where there was a death directly related to a cyber attack because an emergency patient basically had to be rerouted. And there was a delay in obtaining first care, and it was fatal. Is that typical of the sort of thing you're concerned about when you think about cyber attacks and patient safety?
Yeah, that's where again, IT meets nursing. Nursing, you're always concerned about your patients, right? Any area of nursing, it's always patient focused. In fact, I think it was 2022 in Iowa, a 3-year-old died because of a cyber attack. That they were given a high dose of the medication that was ordered, and it was due to the electronic health medical record being down.
These cases are always tragic, no matter who is involved. It seems especially so when it's a child or a young person. And I think one of the questions many people would have is whether those records are protected sufficiently if someone does adhere to the regulations. In other words, if someone can pass an audit and say, we are fully compliant with all of our regulations, doesn't that guarantee the safety of their patients and all of their records?
No, there's no guarantee, really. There's, a focus on third-party risk assessments. Are your third-party people, these cyber attacks are coming in through third parties. Are you doing assessments on your third-party people? And if that's not happening, that's a huge, huge issue and a big risk. That's where a lot of the cyber attacks come in, through third-party vendors. Well,
we tend to see in the news the attacks that occur against very large healthcare organizations, regional hospital chains, or in one very recent one here in Florida, OneBlood, which provides whole blood and blood components to hospitals all over Florida. They have a ransomware attack going on as we speak. The fact that those large organizations make the news, does that mean that if you're in a smaller organization, you don't have to worry because the cyber criminals are always going to put their sights on the large organizations?
No, not necessarily. The small ones are just as vulnerable as the large ones. They think that they can get money out of you in a ransomware, they're going to attack whoever they can figure out. In fact, I think maybe the smaller ones are more apt to be getting attacked. I think maybe we just don't hear about that just because they are small.
You talked about nursing meeting IT. And here I'll say, we can talk, doctors think they're important, and they are, but nursing is where care really happens. So with the idea of nursing an IT meeting, I know in many industries we talk about the cultural issues between, say, the sales department in IT or the marketing department in IT or some other operational group and IT. Does that same sort of cultural gap exist in healthcare? Is it difficult getting the nursing organization and the IT organization to talk to one another?
In my experience, yes. It was two separate bubbles, and it was very difficult to get one to understand the other's focus.
Well, this seems like a nice place to start pivoting from looking at all the problems and being afraid of what's can happen to talking about some solutions. So if you are in IT management at a mid-size healthcare organization, what sort of steps can you start to take to reduce the risk of this sort of cyber attack for your patients?
So one of the first ones would be a risk assessment. You'd want to do a risk assessment, and not only do the risk assessment, but make sure you act on the results of that assessment. You see many organizations get the risk assessment back and, okay, that's great, we check that box. But if you're not fixing, the findings, it does no good to have the assessment. So that's one. Making sure your patching, vulnerabilities, all that is being managed on a regular basis. And then one of the other big ones is your third-party risk assessments.
Would you also add, it seems like a lot of the issues come about through human action or human error. I mean, is training on cybersecurity perhaps more important than it tends to show up in the organizations?
Absolutely. Training on that. And it can't just be the yearly training. It has to be constantly refreshed and brought up time and time again.
How about this whole communications problem between nursing, between frontline healthcare and IT? I mean, what do you suggest as a way to get started? A softball game, brown bag lunches where they each hear about the other? How would you suggest that someone get started bridging that cultural gap? That's
kind of where a compliance team like Access Points Compliance comes in. We come in and we look at your policies and we look at the IT policies and we bridge that gap. We can come in and talk to both nursing leaders and IT and say, okay, we need to come to a common ground. Do you understand this about IT, and do you understand this about nursing?
It sounds like this is an issue we're going to hear a lot more about in the future. And I'm sure you're going to be writing more articles, and we're looking forward to having you back on. Can you tell us a little bit about what you are working on, what research you're doing that we might see from you in the future?
The next research would probably be the change management big breach not too long ago, the HIPAA breach, and that was due to a third-party vendor not having a simple thing such as multi-factor authentication.
Sometimes it is the simple things that mean so much, isn't it?
It really is.
Well, Kathy, thank you so very much for being with us today. We truly appreciate it, and we look forward to having you as a guest on the CyberWatch podcast in the future.
Oh, thank you, Kurt. I look forward to it myself.
Our thanks to Kathy Boyle for joining us today. Well, that's it for this week. Please join us again next week for the CyberWatch podcast, and be sure to visit CyberWatch on LinkedIn and at www.accesspointconsulting.com/CyberWatch. I'm Curtis Franklin. We'll see you next week.